Tonight on Fixed Ops Focus with Dave Rogers and Steve Shaw, we reveal why it's just a noise is the scariest sentence in the English language, and how to bill for it with a straight face.
Hey Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Dave. What's on your mind?
Maintenance is on my mind today.
Maintenance is on your mind. All right,
Yes.
let's talk about maintenance. What's going on?
Well, I mean, I think that I had a situation, I had a little story. I'll tell you a quick little a couple years ago, but bring my car in for service, my Dodge Charger, and it's nothing fancy. It's not a Hellcat, so don't get all all excited, right? It's just a regular Charger with a 5.7 Hemi, and I bring it to a store, and I've always been one to over maintain, or I'd say maintain my vehicles. And, I laughed because I had to fight with the advisor, almost like the story you tell sometimes. But, I want my oil changed every 5,000 miles. I want my tires rotated every time. I think, my car has 50,000 miles on it. And I'm like, check the spark plugs. And he's like, "The spark plugs are good for 100,000 miles." I go, no, no, check the spark plugs, and arguing with the guy. So, you know, you called it's my rant, but the factory maintenance on the car and the factory books and all this stuff that, basically is just like it's Kool-Aid, drinking the factory Kool-Aid and
Right.
it's just every day I see it. When I see the advisors answer the phone, I hear it. Oh, is your light on? How many miles are on your car? No, you don't need an oil change. Like it's just one of those things that just every day gets under my skin.
Well, I remember I've heard your entire rant that usually goes on for, I don't know, 40 minutes to an hour. And so I agree with you. I think that, factory main we have a class called factory maintenance and driveway sales. And, I'm often trying to get people to add additional items on in the drive. And then I'll hear from even managers occasionally where they'll say, no, we don't want to sell in the drive. And I'm like, we're not selling anything particularly. We're just presenting the facts. We're presenting right out of the owner's manual and just saying, let's just get what the owner's manual said. And I call that the minimum requirement. But that is really the least that you can do on your car, right? And
Right.
how well has the least you can do on your car worked for our customers over the years?
It hasn't done very well. I mean, most people in the car business can remember a few years back when COVID happened, and let's say 2021, and there wasn't a lot of cars out there. There wasn't a lot of new cars, right? The inventory was restricted. There was no leasing, so you had folks coming out of their leases that they were almost forced to buy their own lease.
Right.
Almost forced to buy it, right? Because they couldn't get another car, maybe they couldn't get bought, maybe there was no vehicles out there, nothing they liked, whatever it was, and they're buying these vehicles, and, those are vehicles that they basically neglected for 3 years in a lot of cases, and, we had instances where people had their engine blow up or major damage to the car 6 months to a year after buying their own lease, and they wanted to be mad at us, and I'm like, "Dude,
Right.
I did not change your oil for 3 years, that was you."
Right.
So, there's plenty of people out there, if you're paying attention and you see it, you timing chain issues, you see a lot of different issues that happen on cars. And, most of the time, if you did a root cause on it, catalytic converters failing, it's all from lack of maintenance. That's what it's from.
Well, I think you had brought it up one time too about was it a Land Rover engine? $70,000 or something like that, where it's got this incredible maintenance interval. This interval is its annual interval, and if you miss one, right? Heaven forbid if you miss one, it's bad enough if you go 12 months without an oil change, and then heaven forbid if you actually missed an oil change. What would that do to the engine? What would that do to all of those parts? And then for a customer to end up with a $70,000 bill, holy cow, right? And I think, but yours was a little bit even different in that respect. It wasn't the customer, it was your dealership, right?
Well, it was at the dealership. We were doing a state inspection on the car. It was just sitting there idling, and the timing chain jumped. And the root cause was the guy bought the vehicle used, and he'd been coming in once a year for the oil changes like they recommended. I don't think it had that many miles on it when he bought it. He was following the maintenance in the book. The thing had about 70,000 miles on it. It was just a normal annual state inspection after a regular service, and sitting there idling at the inspection machine, and the timing chain jumped, and you take the car apart and you find out the top of the engine's sludgy, and these timing chains are the tensions is maintained with the hydraulic tensioner, and oil goes through the tensioner, and if it's a little sludgy, it doesn't extend all the way, and the chain gets loose and it jumps. This one it's a catastrophic failure on the engine. It caused the engine damage, and yeah, it was a major issue. And this guy wasn't a jerk. He was, I mean, he was upset with us, but it wasn't like he never changed his oil. He followed the book. And there's some Land Rovers, and I'll say the name, that, the ideal maintenance schedule in the book is 21 months for the first
Holy cow.
21 months. So, like that's a disaster waiting to happen. It really
Well,
is.
yeah, and we're talking about just trying to get people to present the minimums, right? If we're just, and that's just getting in the game. And if the minimum is going to give you on a JLR or, on some of those, even a Mercedes or some of those cars that you're not changing every 12 months, I mean, what is that doing to the inside of the engine? It is absolutely crazy. And I spend my time on the drive trying to add an additional item onto that, right? And one of our classes we talk about fluid or fluid additives, and I know that everybody's not really into fluid maintenance or fluid additives or those types of things. But if I do have that car that has a 21-month interval, or if I do have that car 12-month interval, what kind of peace of mind would that give you? At least you're giving your car the best chance that you possibly could.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you gotta hedge your bet one way or the other, right? So, whether it's an additive or whether it's just, I still live by the mantra, you just every 6 months, every 6,000 miles, just change the oil, do a tire rotation. It's $100,
Right.
right? Even if you get a free one from the factory, like Volkswagen, they give you a free one every year. Come in at 6,000 miles, get that oil change, pay for that one, get the next one for free.
Yeah.
Because you never know what's going to happen. A 3-year lease, as we've seen in the past, can turn into an ownership deal, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I bought 2 cars off a lease,
right, it's
going into it though, knowing that I might keep this car. I might
right,
keep this car. And I am one of those people that I do over maintain. There was a time in my life when I really couldn't afford to,
right.
but I couldn't afford not to, you know what I mean? And if I was traveling and training and starting my training career, I didn't have extra money laying around. I drove a lot because I had to save money on travel, or I had to save money here where I could. But I knew that if I didn't do, the maintenance on my car, I'm gonna get stuck in Utah, with an engine problem. And certainly as a entrepreneur and somebody like that, I can't afford to be stuck somewhere, let alone I couldn't afford to pay the bill, let alone not make it to my next job. And I think that puts me in the same category as a customer.
It puts you in the categories, every one of us. I mean, the old "pay me now or pay me later" commercial they used to have, right?
Yeah,
It's
friend.
kind of it's kind of what it is, right? So, I mean, you have the manufacturer that, I understand what they're doing. It's a marketing thing. Cost of ownership is a real
Right.
thing. You want to look good in all the magazines and stuff, but you know, it's not honest, and it's not the best thing for the customer.
Yeah.
Your car, depending on what brand you have, 50,000 miles, your powertrain warranty's up, unless it's a Hyundai or Kia, right?
Yeah.
Um, and once it's 50,000 miles, does the manufacturer really give a rat's butt what happens to your car? So changing the oil once a year is going to get you 50,000 miles. There's a pretty good chance you're going to make it, but you might not make it to 100,000 miles at that life, and you're most likely not gonna.
Well, yeah, back in the day, I mean, it was 3,000, 3,500 mile intervals, and we looked at cars as disposable at 100K, right? At
Right,
100,000, that car was going to be traded in, or that car was,
right.
its useful life was over. Now we're at 5,000 or 10,000, and as you're saying, now the useful life is 50,000.
It doesn't make any sense, just because that's when the warranties are over, right?
It's
I mean, you spend all this money, and even if you're leasing a car, most dealerships, like if you brought back your lease, Steve, and you told me, listen, here's my receipts for me changing the oil, and you're returning in at lease. As a dealership, I'd want that car. I might even pay you a couple extra dollars for that trade because it doesn't need anything, right?
yeah,
So, there's an advantage to doing this extra $100. And if you think about it, honestly, you have a 3-year lease and the book says come in once a year. That's 3 oil changes, right? If they were, if they were free for the like BMW, they're free, right? Some manufacturers are free. If you paid for one in between, it's $300, right? Each
yeah.
for $100 each one. I gotta believe the dealership's gonna give you $500 extra for your trade-in if they know that you over maintain the car, right? you're
Yeah.
not going to lose any money. You're going to make $200 on a deal if you really think about it. So I just think that, and I know, we don't want to go the 45-minute rant, but, when you look at the spark plugs, for example, I'm telling the advisor, the book says 100,000 on spark plugs. I have 50. Check the plugs. I actually just told him to replace them. And he's like, well, they don't need it. It's 100,000. I said, then pull one, have your tech pull one and call me up. So he pulls one. He goes, you know what? You're right. It needs it. I said, of course it needs it. 100,000 miles is a pipe dream, right? I don't want my catalytic converter going bad because I have no intentions of getting rid of the car, right? I
Right.
like to keep it. So if I kept driving like that, I'm going to be dumping fuel. You're always going to have a little bit of extra oil that you're burning through these cars, right? And all of a sudden, guess what I'm going to have? I'm going to have to buy myself a catalytic converter. And for those of you at home asking, keeping score, it's over 8 years old now, so it's out of the federal emissions warranty. So it's on me. It's my dime, right? So, when I say that is most people don't understand the mechanics. They don't understand the cause and effect, and it's all these little things that we just skip by because it's less ag. Like like you said, I don't want to be pushy before. It's in the book says 100,000 miles, but every mechanic in your shop knows that the plugs don't last 100,000 miles. Everyone does.
Well, it's funny because I study every day something, whether it's sales training. I do some technical stuff. I do I there's I'm always online doing research. And one of my favorite things though is I follow Chris Voss. He's the ex FBI hostage negotiator, and he's always talking about consequences and in negotiations about the consequences. What are the consequences? And I talk about consequences very often in our training about, when it comes to objection handling sometimes, or what are the consequences if you don't make this purchase. And it's one of those things that our advisors, I believe, will rebel against because everybody's so much looking for that CSI. We talked to Brad recently, and Brad was talking about how you can do better, perform better, and have great CSI. And I truly believe that if I'm educating you and I'm letting you know, hey, Dave, if you wait till 100,000 miles to replace your spark plugs, yeah, the consequence could be you're going to need a catalytic converter way earlier, than you normally would. And I would educate you on that. What are the chances that our advisors are going to take that step and say, you need to do that? And then you bring it all the way back to an oil change. And it's bad enough to talk about the consequences of an engine or a catalytic converter that cost, it costs thousands of dollars. But if I've got to talk to you about, the consequence of not changing your oil every 5,000 miles, what that does, I don't see a lot of them out there that are willing to make that investment in themselves and an investment in their customer to talk about the consequences and the reasons for accelerating or what was the right word, doing more than the manufacturer's maintenance schedule, right? Giving my car the best care that I possibly can is what we would say. There's not a lot of advisors that want to really go down that path.
Yeah, and I don't understand it. It probably goes back to training, right? Shock, shock. Um, but it also comes back. I think there is a gap between knowing cars, knowing, like having a logical mechanical brain. Like I was fortunate. That's just the way I think. Um, and starting as a tech maybe, but I was always a student of the game. Even when I wasn't a tech anymore and I was an advisor, I would read the repair orders. I would talk to the technicians, I'd pick their brains and stuff. But a lot of this stuff is just logic. And, if you're not exposed to that, you're not trained by it. Maybe if you're not interested in it, because there's a lot of advisors that really just probably aren't car people, they're not car guys or girls. But yeah, no, it needs to be packaged up and phrased in a way that your customer understands. They eat fruits and vegetables and whole foods, right? You probably have a better chance of being healthy when you get older than if you're just popping in gumdrops, candy, chocolate bars, and Big Macs all the time, right? And we can all talk that way, and sometimes it's a challenge for people when it comes to cars. But I think it's important that they learn. And it starts up front too. I mean, that'd be my message for a general manager is have your salespeople learn some of the maintenance. And I know, we usually save that to the end, but I think everybody in a dealership should be a student of the game and not just like, a Google person. Learn what these cars need, learn what's the best care, learn what, the best mechanics in your shop would recommend what would they do with their own cars. Right?
Yeah.
There's always a great source of information because I've had these conversations with advisors and they're like, the factory says, and oh no, and then you bring one of your techs up and you go, hey, when do you change the oil in your car? Every 3, 4 months. Like, you know, really? Then why are we telling customers that they're going to wait till the light comes on? Well, that's them. I don't do that. I would never do that in my car.
I
That's
would never
neglect.
do that. Exactly. Exactly.
They always tell you the same thing. I would never do that. So,
Well, and even think about, at the dealership, let's just say $100, $200 an hour we're charging to work on or to take care of somebody's biggest or second biggest investment in their life, right? And the job of an advisor, I believe, is incredibly serious. It's a great way to make a living, certainly, but the responsibilities that we advisors have, I think that sometimes gets lost. We're taking care of somebody's, second biggest or biggest investment in life, and we're treating it like a throwaway computer because I'll be willing to pay $100 an hour to work on my computer or have the plumber come to my house. But we're not taking that serious enough at sometimes, and I'm not trying to beat anybody up, but I think sometimes we don't recognize the importance of our job and the importance to share those consequences or what happens if with our customer. And fundamentally, deep in my heart, I believe that is the primary job of the customer, of the advisor, is to educate that customer on the what ifs.
I agree. I mean, we've all heard the cases of the car leaving the shop, with a bubble in the tire and never telling the customer. Car flips the Firestone tire fiasco back in the early 2000s, right? Right. But you've heard these things where the dealership's held liable, technician could be personally held liable, although that, generally isn't going to happen because they're looking for deep pockets. But
Yeah.
we've all seen it where you don't mention it to the customer and it's kind of warranty is a perfect example, right? We don't pay any attention to the 3 C's and making sure the notes are in there until you get an audit. Then all of a sudden everyone snaps to attention, right? So, you try to use your advice, your experience in life, and you try to use your experience to tell people. Um, your Ford story with the Ford diesel pickup with the air filter is another perfect example, right? We're not recommending that. And the guy needs an engine, and the factory wants to hold the dealership responsible because we didn't tell the guy, right? So, I think there's a happy medium. You don't want to be like that old school guy like we used to do when I first started in the business. I had a rubber stamp, a red stamp, and I'd say, Steve, your car's due for a 15,000 mile service. And you say, I just want the oil change today. And I'd reach over and take that stamp and put on the RO, customer decline, factory maintenance, right? You know, I always thought that was kind of rude, but that was the rules in this place. But that got the point across sometimes. And we had people go, what the hell's that? Why is that on my RO? And then they change their mind to get the service. I didn't do a good enough convincing them. So the red stamp did.
Well, in today's day and age, I'd get behind that. I'd get behind that. We used to talk about pass or fail, and we'd write fails inspection, in big red letters on the multi-point back then because we wanted to create that urgency. And it was a litigious society. My job is to, as well as selling and as well as making lots of money, it is to protect the dealer, from ourselves. And so we do have to make sure we do those things. And if somebody told me they were putting a stamp on an RO that said customer decline factory maintenance, I would give them a big hug. I promise you, I'd walk up and give them a big hug and say, you go, because that is, I haven't seen that in a long, long time, but I'm truly believe, if I added my brother, and we should get him on and talk about this, my brother, he's got a Dodge Charger also. And he's been taken into the dealership for service. He takes it into the same one over and over and over. And then he happened to buy it about an hour. He moved up here near where I live. And then I took it in for him to one of my stores. And certainly I take it in. They did the multi-point. And what do they say? Hey, you need to get tires. And he's like, tires? And I said, yeah, that doesn't look like there's been an alignment. I can't, we did some research, looked at all of his ROs. He never had an alignment. And I don't think he was rotating it properly. So, 30,000 miles, he's got to replace his tires. And so basically everything you and I talk about played out right in front of me because nobody at this dealership presented him, hey, you got to rotate your tires with your oil change. Nobody presented him alignment. And so he's out $800, $1,000. And so he probably tells the story much better than I do, but that happens, and it happens internally. I am Steve Shaw and I'm in the dealership so I can smooth him over and everything. But how many customers have come through your drive or other drives that we did that and the guy got mad and they drove away and never came back?
Yeah, and there's no way to know. The funny thing is, I laugh at is I work for the company. I bring my car into one of my stores. I'm asking them to do things, and they're basically saying no. And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, I'm not a bazillionaire. That's not the point here. The book says coolant, change it at 100 or 120. Change it now. Just be done with
Yeah.
it. You know what I mean? It's going to be, -7 degrees one day. I don't want to deal with, a frozen block. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't believe the book. When I first started in this business in the 80s, everything had conventional oil. Every car manufacturer said the following: 7,500 miles for the oil change. You could change the filter every other visit. That's what they said in the books. It was
Uh-huh.
bizarre, right? Like and nobody ever did that. You'd never change the oil and not the filter, right?
Right.
Um, but most recommendation and what most people in the business thought, and even people outside the business, like people, they would bring their car in every 3 or 4 months at 37.5 to change the oil and filter. That's just what they did.
Yeah.
We used to lube all the little pivot points with white grease, right? We used to rotate the tires every other visit. That was the maintenance in the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000, I want to say 2003, 2005. These manufacturers decided that they were going to fight for the consumer reports and they were going to fight for some of this stuff. Toyota being the the best example, they
Yeah.
changed their books to 5,000 miles for oil change and tire rotation, bringing people back in twice a year, which we were okay with. They were using 020 synthetic or semi-syn oil at the time. So with a little bit better oil, doesn't have to be changed so often. And then as soon as they started paying for those oil changes in 2010, guess what happened? The interval
Yeah.
went from 5,000 to 10,000. The same oil, the same
Exactly.
everything, right?
Exactly. Well, and as well, you alluded to this. Um, Now I'm going to take that car in on trade.
Right.
So now I'm
Right.
going to take that 336 that lease vehicle in on trade, or the 50,000-mile vehicle on trade that somebody neglected, and then we're going to put a warranty on top of it, or maybe we're responsible for that warranty for a short period of time, and then now the dealer's got to pay for an engine, or the dealership's got to pay for that repair. Um, and so I get that. We talk about, why didn't the salesperson say that, right? Because if we were selling cars, we would tell everybody all the bad things.
Right.
Um, but so I get why they're not doing it, but certainly on that visit, on the sales and service handoff, or those things, there should be, that I think that's why that's so powerful. But it's also one of the least exercised processes where, that customer is introduced to service, and they do get the 5 minute, 10 minute, introduction to a service advisor, and they get to learn about their car. How powerful is that? And so many dealers are not doing that anymore.
No, it's a path of least resistance. That's really what it is. And I think that I don't think that that's a negative. When you're selling somebody a car, I think they're in their glory, they're happy times, right? It's all positive and stuff. It's a great time. You can sell them all weather floor mats because they want to
Right.
protect their new car, right? You can talk to them about maintaining their car. It doesn't have to be a long discussion. It could be here, hand them a menu and say, listen, this is the maintenance schedule we recommend as a dealership. I'm not an expert at servicing cars, but this is what my guys in the back tell me you should do to the car to keep this thing tip top and the highest resale value. Doesn't have to be more than that. You don't have to, get in the dirt and make the guy, squeamish and stuff. But there's things, that's a whole nother topic. One day I like to talk to these owners about reinsurance and their extended warranties. Let's neglect the car for 3 years and then beg to buy it back so
I
I
know
can
that's part
insure
of
it.
your rant.
Yeah, so I can insure it myself, right? Like think about that whole thing, right? But no, I think that, honestly, that if we're being honest with ourselves, we're taking the path of least resistance. We're not doing what we should be doing, and we're not giving people the right advice because it's really bad advice.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we've gone way long. We've gone way long today. So I think that's good advice, right? I think that's a good place to leave us. And just circle back and talk to your GMs. Talk to, I think that's pretty powerful. I actually had one of my trainers today call me and say, "Hey, he's teaching Express. We watched your Express video." And so I think some of the messages are great. And I think the feedback I've gotten from a few of my GM friends is they like your tips of the day.
That's good.
Kind of summarize what we talked about, and how could this apply to a general manager, and how could they utilize this in their stores?
Well, I mean, I think that, the general manager, you're responsible for the whole store. Your comfort zone might be in sales, it might be in F&I, it might be used cars. but you want to bring the whole thing into the picture. And I think if you can, again, you don't have to be an expert in service, but lean on your service manager, make sure there's a menu back there, make sure that you understand it a little bit. And then I think, again, it's as simple as having a salesperson hand this to the customer after they come out of finance, right? The finance guy probably talked to them about some kind of maintenance package anyway. Whether they sold it or they didn't sell it, it's still, hey, this is our maintenance book. This is what we believe in, keeping your car in the best condition. They're happy at that point. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
said, you could sell them all weather mats at that point. But, I think it goes a long way to letting people know two things. One is I'm looking out for you. I want to protect your investment. Two is we want your business,
Yep.
right? There's a
Absolutely.
lot of people when they mention the word oil change, they go, oh, just an oil change. Oh, just an oil change. And it's like, it's degrading, right? No, we want to do your oil change. We value doing your business. And I think that's the message for any GM is you're in charge of the whole business. Don't forget about the service department while you're selling the car.
Absolutely. And that goes back to, I mean, in almost every episode we talk about whether it's training, strategy, or it's long-term vision for your store, right? And I keep thinking about this in my head. I'm like, we have to manage daily, but we got to be looking long-term. We got to be looking out for the best interest of our organization, which is keeping those customers a long time, getting those great value trades in. And then not only does it give us a great trade, but think of all the maintenance, the maintenance income from all of the extra maintenance that we're doing.
Absolutely.
Great stuff. I like the conversation, but we definitely should get into a little bit more about the lack of maintenance and buying those types of cars and the reinsurance side of it and all of that and how
I want to
powerful
get
that is. Because
I want to get Brian on.
that's
Let's
what's
get
going to get somebody's attention.
Yeah, we got to get Brian on the air too. We got to get him on.
Well, let's
So
get Brian on. He can
over
talk.
here.
My brother Brian does a great job. There's nobody better about ranting than my rock and roll brother. So we'll make sure that happens, and see if we can't get him on our next episode.
All right.
Appreciate the conversation, Dave.
All right. Talk to you later, Steve.
Fixed Ops Focus is brought to you by Common Sense. Like, subscribe, and share on all platforms. Side effects may include advisors missing easy upsells, ROs walking out the door, CSI scores tanking, techs chasing comebacks instead of billable hours, your competition stealing your customers, and that special guilt of watching your gross profit bleed out monthly. Results may vary. Consult your Fixed Ops director before ignoring this advice.